Hello and welcome to the Exposure Ninja Marketing Podcast. I'm Charlie, CEO at Exposure Ninja, and today I am joined by our fantastic guest, Phil Tregus Evans, who is the CEO and co-founder of Giraffe social media agency and a partner agency of the Exposure Ninja. Hey Phil, how's it going?
Yeah, it's going well. How are you?
Really good, thank you. So, in the podcast today, we're going to be talking about Phil's new book, which is just being launched called Human First Marketing. And that's pretty much the topic we're going to get into what it means to put people at the heart of your marketing, how AI interacts with that, given everything that's going on right now in AI and marketing, and how ad fatigue, how loads of marketing, all of the content that we see online is actually affecting people and buyers and consumers and essentially all of us, really. So let's get into it. Phil, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Let's get started by, could you tell us what your concept human first marketing really means?
Sure. So, human first marketing is about putting people back at the center of marketing. So, in some ways, it's like going back in time. I think with the advance of data and all of the different ways we now do marketing, we've kind of lost touch a little bit with the fact that when you boil it down, marketing is just one group of humans trying to demonstrate the value they can provide to another group of humans. I've seen a few people mention that we need to stop thinking B2B and B2C and just think H to H, because at the end of the day, we are humans and our customers are humans. And it's about being seen. It's about putting people in front of the marketing, and there's two sides to that, really. There's one side of it, which is your team and yourself, and then the other side of it is your customers, and actually not just doing marketing for your customers, doing marketing with your customers.
Mm, I love the human to human idea with
Yeah, I
marketing.
can't take credit for that, unfortunately.
I think I think that's something that gets lost in B2B in particular quite a lot of the time, especially when you're like, a business needs to buy this service, this software, whatever it is,
Yeah.
and their procurement department's just going to do it. And you almost forget that you are actually marketing to other humans. But it's interesting when we talk about it in B2C, I think. Why do you think it is we've ended up in a sort of situation where sometimes marketing does overlook that human to human aspect?
Yeah, I think there's a few reasons. I think one is data. And,
Mm,
I'm not data. I think data is really helpful and useful. However, I do think that we get lost in it and we get lost in metrics. In the book, I call it the cascade of blame. Because everyone is in high pressure jobs or working in agencies with high pressure, there's an emphasis on short-term results. How do we measure this? It needs to be direct. What's the ROI on every activity that we do? And I think as a result of that, we are so focused on data, so focused on metrics, that we've lost touch with the fact
mm,
that we are actually dealing with humans and real people here. At Giraffe, we talk about the fact that our customers, we make sure we're not speaking about them as data points. These are real people, and marketing should be thinking about that. I think sometimes it's not. And yeah, some of that is because of this high pressure, the CMO being told the results aren't good enough. They're speaking to the marketing manager. Then that goes down to the social media manager, who then speaks to the agency. Everyone's just panicking to quickly get results rather than think a little bit more long term about strategy.
I completely agree with that. And, we focus a lot for our clients on the data and the ROI. I think it's interesting because most marketing is multi-channel these days. Businesses marketing across omni-channel. They interact and have so many touch points that it can be really difficult to go so granular to see the
Yeah.
touch point of, did every social post, did every piece of content, did every email actually contribute? And sometimes when you just take one thing away, like you switch off the PPC ads or you take out the email marketing, suddenly it affects the whole funnel. It's so difficult to map every singular touch point that every person coming through a funnel, especially in larger businesses, actually has, that you
Mm.
almost don't know until you actually take something away and then see the impact on how those channels actually relied on one another, which is something I'm sure you see quite a lot between organic social, paid social, and everything that goes with it.
Yeah, I think on a broader scale than that, even, I think marketing generally, when you consider all of the different touch points, whether it's SEO, like the work that you guys do, or social media, like the work we do at Giraffe, or even out of home advertising, TV advertising. There are so many touch points now. The modern consumer journey is far from linear. It's pretty chaotic. And I think Google referred to it as the messy middle, hard to track, and they're just sort of bouncing all over the place. And I'm sure we'll get onto that in a bit.
Oh, absolutely. There is, before we get onto that though, there is a question that I feel like is the elephant in the room that I want to tackle just like straight away. And I
Sure.
think that's when people are hearing human first marketing, I would expect some people might assume that means anti-AI. But actually, I think from reading the book, you have a much more balanced and nuanced view of how AI interacts with marketing. What is your perspective on the role of AI?
I think you're spot on to call it the elephant in the room. I think it's the elephant in the room of lots of conversations in marketing at the moment. It is actually the most common response when I tell people that Giraffe is a human first agency or that I'm writing a book called Human First Marketing. The normal response is, oh, that's great because AI is going to take over everything and we need to be more human. And, there's an element of that. But I'm not anti-AI. I think I'm just anti-lazy AI. Yeah, I think there's a difference. And I think with AI, there's a tendency to remove nuance and think of it as good or bad, rather than the fact that it could be somewhere in the middle. If someone goes to ChatGPT and says, write me a LinkedIn post, and then they just copy and paste it, I would argue that's bad. But if they go to ChatGPT and say, I'm going to do a post, I want to talk about this, my opinion on it is that, I kind of want to get across this, can you put that into a structure? And then they take that and then they edit it. There's a spectrum. And for me, I think we have to try and embrace AI, because I think without we're getting into a dystopian fiction novel, resistance is futile. I think the people who resisted the internet when it first came out probably aren't here now. So we need to embrace it. But what we don't need to do is replace sort of the humanity with AI. I think the future is human plus AI, not human versus AI. It's how I would probably phrase it.
I completely agree with that perspective, actually. And I think that burying our heads in the sand about AI is not the way to go, because it is going to integrate into the work we do. I love that you call it lazy AI, because it's lazy work. Lazy AI work is just lazy work with AI. It doesn't actually make it any better.
Yeah, and it's I think you only have to be on LinkedIn for a few minutes to see that it's just the most commonly discussed topic, and people are kind of talking about, oh, you can spot AI posts and this. And I think it's important to remember that with something this monumental, this big of a change, there's inevitably a lot of fear, a lot of insecurity about our roles, our skill sets, what relationship we're going to have with AI. And I think that the real struggle with it is that no one really knows yet. We're still figuring it out, and it's moving so quickly that it feels like we don't really have the time to get ready. So I understand the trepidation for sure.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for just playing with AI as you go, because very few people are ever going to feel like they're actually ready for the evolution of AI. And the best thing you can do, I think, is actually just use it, be familiar with it, and not be totally closed off to the idea of it.
Yeah, I think one of the big things for me is the transparency. I think in the same way that, we require people who are doing influencer marketing to label things as ads, I think it's important that if you're using AI, that you're transparent about it and you say, this is how we're using it and this is how we're not using it. I think that for me is really pivotal.
I absolutely think so. I don't know if you have an opinion on this. I'm going slightly off topic, but on social media, sometimes you see absolutely wild videos that are definitely made by AI. And I know that Instagram in particular has like a box to say like this was made with AI, quite rightly, as it should do. But I'm conscious that sometimes people are not ticking that, even though something is definitely made by AI. And, they're like wild things. You talk about dystopian fiction, but that is the kind of thing that people are making AI videos of to then sort of, sensationalize and create a kind of crazy conversation on social media. What's your perspective on all of that?
Yeah, similar. I think there needs to be transparency, and I think that one of the reasons there probably isn't full transparency at the moment is that there is a bit of a witch hunt for anything AI generated at the moment, and I think there are probably a lot of people using AI who pretend they're not using AI because they're in fear of people judging them or questioning their skills or, you know, their knowledge. It's kind of just thrown everything up in the air, and I don't know how it's all going to fall yet, but I think that embracing it, like you say, not sort of resisting, being transparent, I think is the key to it.
Yeah. So this kind of leads me into a crux of one of the chapters of your book, which was about the idea of the homogenization of marketing, a bit of a mouthful,
Mm.
but essentially AI generated content being everywhere. Something we see in search in terms of actual blog posts and AI generated pages, and you can spot them a mile off because they're rubbish if they're not edited. And I imagine you see the same thing in social media as well, like you say, LinkedIn posts that are just very sort of lazy AI usage.
Mm.
And one of the things that you also mentioned in the book was people being exposed to just hundreds of ads every day, which I feel myself, and I'm sure you do. Did you estimate 300 to 400 ads is what the average person
Yeah,
was?
it's really hard to pinpoint the number, obviously,
Mhm.
because I mean, how would you even start to try and measure that? The closest sort of study I found, which was a few years old, to be fair, was I think 362 ads per day. Which, you know, when you think about when you wake up and, you know, we all do this, first thing you do is you reach for your phone and you start scrolling through things. You know, often before you've even lifted your head off the pillow, you've probably seen 20, 30 ads through looking at your emails, through looking at your social, the news. So we're seeing a lot of them. But the same study found that of those 362, they estimate that people can only really recall 12. So,
Yeah. Wow.
yeah, I mean, in the book, I kind of talk about how much is spent on advertising a year. And at the beginning of the book, which I was writing in 2024, it was all estimates, whereas now we're in 2025. We know that over $1 trillion was spent on paid ads in 2024, and 12 of 362 is about 3%, just over. So that means essentially you know, over $950 million was spent on ads last year that no one can remember.
Thing. Yeah. That's absolutely wild. I think it says a lot about the need for really strong ad creative and good targeting in ads in particular, which,
Yeah.
yes, what's your perspective on how businesses are like if they're competing with hundreds of others running ads in an average day, and there's only going to be roughly 3% that actually get sort of sticky enough to be memorable? What would your advice be for brands trying to compete with that and actually cut
Yeah.
through the noise?
It's really difficult. And there's a chapter in the book on paid advertising, and I start it by essentially acknowledging another elephant in the room. That is, you know, I start the book by just absolutely laying into paid advertising and how ineffective it can be and how much money is wasted. But really, for me, the secret to cutting through the noise is being human first, is creating advertising that people can connect with, that provides value, that isn't just pushy kind of let me sell you something type advertising. You know, your team in your advertising, using your voice and displaying your values and really focusing on empathy rather than just sales. And I think also it's important that your ad feels native and not jarringly sort of interruptive, because a lot of advertising is more push style marketing where people don't want to see it. You know, there's a statistic in the book, and I can't remember off the top of my head, about the number of people who use ad blockers. You know,
Mm.
if you went to a networking event and 50% of the people there had a big sign hanging around their neck saying, "Don't speak to me," you'd probably think, oh God, like, should I be at this event? Like, this seems a bit, but that's the dynamic with advertising. And it doesn't feel like anyone's really talking about that dynamic and understanding, well, what we're going to do, rather than just, let's just keep spending more money,
Mm.
which doesn't feel like the right solution. It feels like a band-aid to me.
Absolutely. So funny that you mentioned that about a networking event. I went to a fantastic event last year called Spotlight, which is run by SEMrush. And one of the cleverest things I've ever seen at an event, when you go in, they gave you you chose the color armband that you wanted, or wristband, I should say. And they had like a red, yellow, green, and green was like come chat to me. I can't wait to talk. Yellow was like, oh, I'll have a conversation, but I need to ease into it. And red was like, please don't network with me.
Don't even look at me.
And I was like, actually genius.
Yeah. Networking events are difficult. The analogy I use is it's like going to a restaurant to eat a meal and then getting there and everyone's looking at you to be the chef. Everyone is there for their own selfish reasons usually. So it's trying to find ways to do it. But that sounds like a really good method of doing that.
It's such a cool idea, I thought. So you were talking a lot there about actually using empathy to connect with customers, like creating an emotional connection, I guess, rather than trying to avoid that feeling of like, this is just a transaction. Like you're just coming to this website, making a transaction, buying the thing and then leaving, actually keeping customers with you and connected. How would you recommend a marketer actually do that?
Yeah. I think the first big paradigm shift is to try and focus less on short-term sales results and more on long-term lifetime customer value, brand advocacy. I think if you change the paradigm and your focus is actually not how can we get someone from not knowing the brand to buying a product as quickly as possible, and instead focusing on how do we connect with our customers in a way where they want to keep purchasing from us and they trust us and they want to tell people at the bus stop about us and, they start becoming advocates. I think when you start thinking about marketing with that lens, it naturally is going to change how you think about what you do and the tactics you use and how you communicate. I think it's trying to think, well, why would people care about this? How do we make people care about this? Rather than how do we trick people into buying this product as quickly as possible and for the lowest cost per acquisition possible,
It's very much a sort of short-term and long-term mindset. I think if you only think short-term, there's a lot of dangerous things that people might do in marketing, certainly in the world of search, a lot of black hat SEO. It's because the focus is so focused on just how do I get sales in now, and I don't worry about if I'm gonna fall off the cliff with my Google rankings later, because you're so focused on now. And actually the importance of businesses building sustained growth and sustained marketing investment, I think, as well, in order to keep that going long term, rather than just thinking about quick wins and not thinking about the future of the business and the people that work in it as well, which all goes hand in hand.
And I understand why that's the case. It's really hard starting a business, growing a business. We've been there and it's difficult. And having that conversation with smaller business owners to say, don't worry about sales this month, worry about the sales in 2 years' time. I get that that's probably quite a hard sell. And that's where I think you have to find the balance. That naturally you are going to have short-term sales to survive. We aren't all fortunate enough to be backed by heavy investment and have really long runways. And, a lot of us, we have to generate stuff now. But I think that's where it comes into thinking, okay, yes, we want to sell something this month, but how do we build an experience, not just through the purchasing process, but through our marketing process, where that person who does complete the purchase wants to do that again in a few months' time, or they're so impressed by the way we've done things that they're telling other people about it, and that's generating short-term sales. So it can be a tricky sell for sure.
Yeah, but the best outcome is definitely that word of mouth. People start talking about you. They wouldn't consider shopping anywhere else. I think that's the dream, right? For every business, is that the point they get to with their marketing. One of the things that links into this that you talk about is a sort of trust deficit, and brands actually starting from a trust deficit, having to build that trust, especially in terms of digital marketing and the way that they shop online. What's your take on how brands actually do that and get that trust?
Yeah, it's very difficult. I think the first thing is accepting that we are starting from a trust deficit. We're not living in a time where trust is a given and it's there to be lost. Trust has to be gained to start with. And I think when we accept that people are a little bit skeptical of businesses, of marketing, maybe there is a lack of trust there. The best way to do it is to put your people at the forefront, let them see who your team are, who are your executives. We work with some brands at Giraffe where they have amazing executive teams who are super up for being on camera and having a LinkedIn presence. It's been shown in studies that customers and team members prefer to do business with companies where the executive team is visible, where they can see employees talking about the brand, because it's more trustworthy. People trust communication from people more than they do from corporate brands.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of we've worked with many cybersecurity companies over the years, and one thing you always see on a cybersecurity website is this stock image of like a woman receptionist with like she's got a little headphone type mic here, and it's so posed and so obviously stock image. You know, as soon as you look at it, even if you don't work in marketing, if you know nothing about marketing, it just sort of clicks in your brain to know that that's like a staged photo. That isn't Jenny that you'll be speaking to when you bring up that cybersecurity business. And things like that, I think, very easy to overlook, especially when you think like, oh, I don't have headshots of all of my team. I don't have these photos of this and that. I don't know how to get all of that stuff. But it makes such a difference to whether someone actually trusts your business. And in that specific example, in that sector, it's so important because people want to know that they're going to have good customer service and they're going to speak to a real human being on the end of the phone if something happens with their website, if their website goes down, or if there's a big hack, a big malware situation. It's like that human to human connection is so important, not just on that first initial purchase, but all the way through the
100%.
whole
Yeah, and people are better at spotting stock imagery and AI generated imagery than ever before. The average modern consumer is pretty savvy. And yeah, all it takes is to see one stock image and immediately people are going to think, is this a real business? Are there people who work here? You know, anyone can just throw up a website now and slap stock images of people high-fiving and writing on glass office walls and, you know, all the stuff that we see every time.
I can do it for you.
Yeah, if you're happy with them all to have 7 fingers, then, you know, it's no problem at all. But yeah, and I think that's the overarching thing here as well, is that with AI, you know, I joke about 7 fingers, but it is getting better. And it will become more and more impossible to be able to tell the difference. And that's why one of the forms of content that we're seeing do really well is what we call lo-fi content, where, you know, the small company that can't necessarily afford to hire a professional photographer to do headshots and do a full-blown photo shoot, pull your phone out, just take photos on your phone. Like, sometimes the lower quality content does better. And that's something that we saw happen in the pandemic when we didn't have a choice. You know, we didn't have studios and lighting and fancy equipment. We were stuck at home. So we had to adapt. And as a result, the quality of the content was lower, but the level of authenticity in the content was higher. And the results spoke for themselves. And, you know, it's why since the pandemic, we've continued to see brands using sort of lo-fi, behind the scenes sort of style content that's often shot on a phone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also for founder-led brands or brands that rely quite heavily on influencer work as well, which is really common and growing these days, you do see that, especially when they start out, you do see them using just, you know, whatever phone it is that they actually have to record, because you can get a fancy mic and a ring light and that's going to make it better. But that's almost like the natural evolution of a business to go through. Okay, let's just figure out what kind of content even works before we start investing in, you know, having these shoots or actually getting all of the equipment to make this quality even better. It's almost like the normal path of like, you give it a shot, oh, something works, it kind of sticks. Okay, I'm going to invest a bit more in that. Yeah. That's essentially how marketing works when you're building it from scratch.
Yeah, it's sort of the visual equivalent of, like, I've heard people saying to me, I am deliberately putting spelling errors in my social media posts so that people know it's not AI.
Wild.
Yeah. And, you know, it's sort of the visual version of that, to say, well, don't have a really polished video. Do film it on your phone. Do be kind of walking around and the camera shaking while you do it, because that's unquestionably real. So yeah, it's an interesting area for sure.
Isn't it wild that people would do things like put spelling mistakes in post to make it not look like AI? I also heard a
Yeah.
similar theme from some of our content team. We're talking recently about how they like to use long dashes, and they naturally
The
do
M
that.
dash. Yeah.
Yeah, they naturally do that in their writing, and I do as well. But it's one of the things that AI also does a lot of, is use the en dash. And so now
Yeah.
they're like, well, maybe I shouldn't be using it in my writing because I don't want it to
Yeah.
look AI when
It,
it's not.
we
It's funny how
think
that's
people,
almost question what we do.
yeah. I think, we all watched Terminator films growing up and thought that the first victim of AI would be humans, but it was the M dash. I don't know if anyone predicted that. I had almost full-blown arguments with my editor because I was like, I don't know if I want to use M dashes because there's this general sort of feeling that people are going to think it's AI generated. And she was like, yes, but it's the right punctuation to use.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really bizarre. So one of the other things you talk about is something called the empath framework.
This is
The
like my
I
mad scientist moment.
love it. The idea is essentially it helps brands and businesses understand their audience better. Can you break it
Yeah.
down? What is it?
So I think this idea was born out of the fact that I hate customer avatars and customer profiles. Sally the shopper and Harry the husband, and I hate it because it goes against everything that human first marketing is about, which is treating your customers as real people. I think trying to find a box to put everyone in and then slap a name on it and call it a person, I don't think it's helpful. And I think that is a big part of why we start to see customers as data points, because we're creating this Frankenstein of different demographics. And there's a brilliant example that someone shared with me when I was discussing this, and it's pretty popular, so you may have even seen it, where they have a list of sort of demographics of age, locations, interests. I think they've been married twice, these sorts of things, and they're exactly the same. And you think, well, you would market to those two people in the exact same way because they fit the demographic. And then you scroll down and it turns out that it's King Charles and Ozzy Osbourne. And obviously you're not going to probably speak to those two people in the same way, yet with this bucket of demographics we put together, they're identical. So the empath framework is about trying to understand our customers in a more nuanced way and as real people. Yes, it is me trying to be clever and coming up with a clever little acronym to look smart, but also it is useful. Each letter stands for something. So the E is for emotional understanding, and this is about trying to understand how our customers are feeling emotionally, which you could kind of pull from obviously conversations, but also like from reviews. If you're a brand with hundreds, thousands of reviews, a really good exercise is to put all of those maybe into an AI tool, dare I say, and ask it to analyze emotions. What emotions come up? Do a word map of the emotions that come up the most to try and understand how our customers are feeling emotionally. The M is market and trend research. What's happening in the market at the moment? What's working? What's not? What are people engaging with? What are people not engaging with? The P is for patterns of behavior. So understanding how people are purchasing products. Do they impulse buy when they come to the website? Do they come to the website, leave, come back? They want to check everything out. What products are they sort of going to most? It's kind of drilling into the data. The A is for audience feedback. So this is where we actually speak to our customers, heaven forbid, and ask them, specifically about what we want to know about them and understand them at a bit of a deeper level. And then for team feedback. And this is, I think, often overlooked in businesses, is that often the people on the front line, whether that's in sales or maybe account management or customer service, they have a better idea of the customer and their pain points and what makes them tick than anyone else, especially anyone in marketing. At Giraffe, I'm often doing new business work. So I'm speaking to people about why they're getting in touch with us on a daily basis. And because of that, I'm sort of privy to a much better understanding of, well, what is it our customers are looking for and how are they feeling and why are they reaching out to us? And then the H is what I'm calling a human understanding map. So rather than a customer avatar, it's a collation of everything we found from the first 5 sources, and where we can really sort of display it in a way that doesn't pigeonhole people into a specific box. It allows for nuance, and allows us to understand our customers in a more human way.
Amazing. I think it's a really good acronym, to be honest. And
Thank
like
you.
we do customer profiling as well.
Oh, we
Actually.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah, everyone does.
Yeah, because we kind of need it. Everyone kind
Yeah.
of needs it to decide where you're positioning a business in the market. But a lot of the tactics that you kind of just explained from the empath framework there really resonate with me and how I think we should, as marketing professionals, actually think about our customers, but also how we do that research. Because I also always use a business's reviews, especially if they've got a good number of them, to understand what that business actually values and what the customer values. It tells you so much about both the customer and the business itself, and particularly like the service it provides to its customers too.
Yeah.
And
you can also look at competitor reviews as well and get a similar vibe.
Oh, absolutely. And I think nothing can replace real conversations. All of the best customer profiling that I see comes from speaking to the customers and speaking to customer service. And as you say, like the sales reps, the people who are day to day actually speaking and understanding those common pain points that are shared between all of the different people that business goes after. How do you bring all of that information together? Because it's like the empath framework, there's a lot going on there. There's like things going on there. And, I can just imagine I'm a marketer, a business owner, a marketing leader, and I'm thinking like, I need to figure out who I'm writing to though, like who I'm putting content out for. And there's so much here. What do they do with that sort of chaos?
Yeah, I think it's certainly a challenge because obviously you are going into lots and lots of detail. And that's, that's the problem with having nuance, is that it can be messy, and it's probably the reason why we tend to favor having things like customer avatars, because it's a simplification that allows us to sort of think about this person that we've created. But the idea is to collate it all into this human understanding map. And there's sort of 5 areas that we can label. And the first is what I call lived realities and challenges. So trying to understand what this person is going through on a day-to-day basis. Like, what does their daily routine look like? What are the key moments of their day? What are the challenges that they're facing? What's the environment that they exist within? So you're going to get some demographic stuff in there. Then you have emotional drivers. What are the triggers that really make these people tick and do things? You can also start to get into pain points there as well and understand that. And I think one thing that isn't talked about enough is sort of emotional resonance. How is trust built with these people? What do they value and how do they establish trust? I think is a really interesting area. Then you can look at things like shared values and context. What are their core beliefs? What are their ethics? What are their generational norms? If they're part of a specific generation, what is normal for that? What's their expectations and their attitudes? And things like trends as well. You can look at trends to sort of understand the context that they're operating within. Then you can drill into decision-making processes, because everyone makes decisions differently. But by looking at your customers on a broad scale, you will start to see patterns. Like I said earlier, are they impulsive? Are they analytical? Are they habitual? Do they kind of make the same purchase because it's what they always do? Or are they more spontaneous? Who's the key influences for these people? Is it reviews? Is it influencers? Is it marketing? Is it, brand reputation? Like, what are the things that really trigger the decision? And then the final one is aspirations and goals, and I think you can kind of bring this to 3 levels. You've got personal goals, whether it's lifestyle, financial. Then you've got their professional goals. What are they doing in their career? What are they trying to learn? And then broader goals, sort of community, legacy, these sorts of things. And that's a lot, that isn't something you can just turn into a neat little avatar. But I think that's good. I don't think we should be trying to remove nuance. I think we should be trying to understand the complexities of humans as much as we can anyway.
I feel like everything you said there perfectly encapsulates the idea of marketing to humans. Like those are the things that drive and motivate us personally. And I guess a lot of that, if someone's thinking this is a lot, there's a lot of information research going on here, which is what goes into a marketing strategy. And sometimes I think can be hard to see if you're the person looking at a marketing strategy you've received. You don't see all of this massive background that goes on behind it that actually informs the recommendations that are coming out at the end point of it. And I think all of that, actually understanding all of that information and nuance, only makes people stronger marketers. It only makes us better. And actually, I think arguably better humans that actually can connect emotionally with people, understanding those things about people in your world outside of business as well. Okay, now I've been holding back on the topic of marketing funnels, and I really want to get into it. I know that you have I'm going to call it controversial opinion about the traditional marketing funnel. And for anyone listening who's not familiar, the traditional marketing funnel is essentially a sort of 4-step funnel where there's an awareness stage, interest, consideration, and then the actual conversion. Someone actually makes a purchase or buys from the business. And you kind of argue that it doesn't really reflect the reality of how people buy today. What do you think's missing? What's your opinion on this?
I have passionate opinions on the marketing funnel, and I will prefix this by saying that I still think the marketing funnel has a place. I still think it's useful. It's still something that we use at Giraffe, with certain clients. This idea that I've had, I mentioned this earlier to you, that this isn't something that I set out to write about in the book. It was something that kind of came to me whilst I was writing the book, and I felt had to be included. So why do funnels suck? Let's get into it. So the first thing is, do you know when the funnel was created? Like the first kind of idea of a marketing funnel?
No.
Where would you date that?
I don't know, the 50s.
I think it was 1898.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's a way of understanding the customer journey that is older than traffic lights, cheeseburgers, bottled water, there's so many inventions since the marketing funnel. So the fact that we're still using an ideology that was designed, almost 130, 140 years ago, to me is crazy. So why do I hate funnels? I think the first is that they typically don't include a stage for advocacy. Some people tag them on, but I think if we're all being honest with ourselves, they're an afterthought. The bottom of the funnel acts like a trapdoor that people fall out of, and an end goal, which is completely anti sort of everything I've said about Human First. The funnel also assumes a gravitational pull, that people are falling down the funnel. It's not how it works. People resist marketing. They have ad blockers. They don't want to be marketed to when they're trying to watch a video on YouTube. So the idea that people are falling and being pulled down by gravity down a funnel is completely incorrect.
Down by a Hoover.
Well, if anything, yeah, that's exactly right. There's a Hoover at the top of the funnel desperately trying to drag them back out of it. So with that, there's also the fact that the modern consumer journey is not linear at all. And because of the sheer quantity of marketing and marketing platforms and styles of marketing and media that we consume, no one is going from awareness to consideration to conversion in a really lovely little neat journey. They're going from awareness to consideration, back out of the funnel, back to awareness, down to conversion. They didn't convert, back up to awareness. They're bouncing around all over the place. And much like with customer avatars, this is an inconvenience for marketers, because how do you track that? How do you plan for that? It's hard. So I think funnels ignore emotion, and I think they ignore the modern consumer journey. And I think it's a misrepresentation of how people interact with brands and purchase products and services. So that's all well and good. What's the solution? Which I'm sure would be your next question. And it's to do with pinball machines. And this is going to be hard to describe because I feel like it's a visual thing. But the model that I have created as a replacement for the funnels, which is a wildly ambitious and perhaps slightly naive ambition, is the pinball method. So picture the funnel, flip it round so it's on its head. So awareness is at the bottom, and that's the bottom of the pinball machine. The customer is and we fire them into our marketing funnel, which is now upside down. So we fire them into our pinball strategy, and along the sides of the pinball machine, we install what I'm calling marketing boosters, which are essentially marketing tactics, influencer marketing, SEO, website, paid ads, social media, out-of-home advertising, and so on. And all of these are designed to propel them up the pinball machine towards conversion and ultimately advocacy. But their natural instinct is to fall back down. And I don't know if you've ever played pinball, but it's frantic. The ball bounces around everywhere. It's naturally trying to come back out of the game, and you're trying to keep it back in play. And I think that is a far more accurate representation of the modern consumer journey. So we have to design marketing that boosts our customers further up the pinball machine and keeps the ball in play, rather than assuming there's this neat linear step-by-step process that they're going to go. And I think when we plan with that sort of ideology, we can be more accepting of the fact that marketing is a long-term strategy. It isn't a case of, people just go through these simple steps. And it really, when you boil it down, is chaos. And it's better for us to kind of acknowledge that and try and plan for that than to try and pretend it's not. So yeah, that's my pitch. What do you think?
That's your hot take on the marketing funnel. There's parts of it that definitely resonate with how I think about our marketing funnel in the industry in general. Things like the fact that it's not a linear journey. And I do think that the visual image of the marketing funnel, as most of us would think of it, does make it look like someone's going to neatly step through the funnel, which is almost never, I'm not saying never, but almost never the case. I do think you're right that people move sort of scatterishly through the funnel, back and forth. I've never thought that awareness, interest, and consideration, particularly distinct stages of the funnel in general. I think it would not be strange for someone to do something that you would consider consideration, like having a consultation call, for example, and then pop back out to actually then be researching now different businesses, reading what they would consider very top of the funnel content, and then later, get pushed back down it by they've seen suddenly an ad when they were scrolling Facebook or whatever it is.
I refer to replace consideration with engagement. Because I think that's more about what I think we should be doing, is not just saying, hey, here's our products, what do you think? Consider them. And instead being like, let's have a conversation, or let's do something where you actually engage with the brand, because that's going to create a deeper connection.
The thing I do like about the funnel, though, I think, is that it creates a sense of clarity, that it is a simplification, but it actually helps marketers to think through the types of things that they're putting out and why they're putting them out. And I actually sometimes think, instead of thinking of these stages, it's easier to just think top, bottom, and middle of funnel, rather than get too caught up on, like, does this fit in interest? Does this fit in consideration? Or, I know that some people are kind of quite fixated on the detail of where a certain type of ad copy would fit. And I generally try and think, like, are you just trying to catch people who don't yet know about you? Or are you at that, as you say, an engaged stage? They already know about you. You're already on their mind sometimes every now and then. And actually you're trying to be sticky. You want to stick with them. Or are you actually trying to now push someone to, you're the right brand for them, for their need? And I do think I like the simplification of, let's create something that works at the top, the middle, and the bottom. I do think, though, the black sheep that is often forgotten that you mentioned there is almost like that advocacy stage, which sometimes you see a picture of a funnel this way round, and then it's got vertically, who's not looking at the visuals, and then it's got almost arrows coming out the bottom and back into the bottom, that then says something like advocacy, which I always think is like the add-on that needed to be evolved into, that never quite made it neatly onto the funnel diagram, but is incredibly important because it essentially like represents repeat custom. And as we spoke about earlier, the idea of someone who would advocate for your brand, would talk about them at the bus stop, would recommend them to a friend, would maybe like retweet things that they share on social media, for example. Are they
But
using
it's
retweet nowadays? Called X? What's it called now?
yeah, that's a really good question. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
You put me on the spot there. That
no, they've deep.
to be fair, I don't really use X anymore. So
No,
yeah, but I think what you're touching on is important because the other big difference between the funnel and the pinball is that the pinball method doesn't have an end. Whereas the funnel is very much like let's get them through a process. And then once we've done this thing, they're ticked, they're crossed off. That's great. Whereas the pinball method acknowledges that actually, yeah, people will have awareness. And then, we're humans. We forget about brands. We forget about products and services. We can't just say, oh, well, they saw our ad, so they know who we are, because we established earlier in this conversation that they can't remember your ad. So they might have been in your awareness stage, but they might not be aware of you. So, it's trying to acknowledge the human element of it, I guess.
I do also think sometimes that advocacy stage at the end gets thought of as like it's an email flow, like it's just email marketing now, which is, email marketing is extremely powerful for re-engaging people with your business or what you're selling, particularly if you're running promotions, that kind of thing. But I also think there's so much more to it in general. I know that for me, actually, sometimes social ads, but often actually this is where organic social comes in for me, reminds me and keeps brands fresh in my mind. But it's the same, I think, sometimes for search. Often you don't even realize that a business you've bought something from. So, for example, if you buy a certain skincare product and then you're researching something else, like a hair care product, for example, sometimes it's actually sold by the brand you bought skincare from and you didn't even know. And you see it again in search and you're like, well, I know I've bought from that brand. I trust that brand. They gave me that really great skincare product 6 months ago. Because I think there can sometimes be an assumption that because someone's purchased from you, they now know your business. They know everything about your business and what you sell. And I think as marketers, we often maybe think that way as well, because we are so close, especially if we're in-house, so close to what's going on, what we sell. Like it's our day, it's our everyday. But actually for most customers, that's, even if they had that information, it's probably gone. And there's a refresh needed.
I think a lot of marketers think of the sort of add-on advocacy stage of the funnel in the wrong way, because the word advocacy doesn't mean more purchases. That's conversion. Advocacy means people who love your brand and actually tell other people about your brand, and they advocate for who you are and what you do and your products and your services. So at that advocacy stage, we talked about email marketing. I would argue that trying to get people to buy more product, that's conversion. They're still in the conversion stage. Advocacy is actually about, how do we celebrate our customers? How do we use our marketing to show our customers in our marketing about how brilliant they are, or reward our customers, or create a brilliant experience for our customers? It's not how do we get them to keep buying our product. That isn't advocacy. That's repeat purchases.
Which I think, it's all connected, right? Advocacy pushes back into repeat purchases as well, because you kind of become an ambassador yourself. I feel like the perfect example is people who wear like Huel t-shirts. They have become advocates. They've got all the way through the funnel, the pinball machine, whatever framework we call it. They're willing to wear that t-shirt, and people they end up there.
The example I use in the book is Harley Davidson, because I think it's the second most tattooed brand. And, if I pulled up my sleeve now and I had like a sweet McDonald's Golden Arches tattoo on my arm, you'd probably think I was a lunatic. But if I rode a Harley Davidson and had a Harley Davidson tattoo, spoiler alert, I don't, but that wouldn't be seen as weird. And that's because they have done a brilliant job of building advocates, of people who there's a sense of belonging to that brand. It's more than a corporate logo. It's a symbol for, rebellion and belonging and all of these things. And that's advocacy. That's like powerful advocacy.
Well, very much so. And I think it also links into repeat purchases. If you've got Harley Davidson tattooed on your shoulder, you're not buying a Yamaha. there's no way you're collecting Harley Davidson life, because how are you going
Yeah.
to explain to anyone that you've got a Harley Davidson tattoo, but you've got, a Honda?
I'm trying to think how you could have your tattoo sort of altered from a Harley Davidson logo to a Honda logo.
I
I'm
don't
not
think
sure how
anyone's
easy that'd be. Yeah.
Yeah, any motorcycle
Yeah.
collectors or specialists listening to me now are like, there's no way anyone would go back that way. So I think that's a perfect example of a brand that has managed to become so sticky and so advocated for by customers who love it. And I think
Yeah.
that's amazing that people feel such a connection and almost like a reflection of their identity within a brand that they
Yeah.
make purchases from. I think it's the pinnacle.
Well, it's similar to, like, if you think about music, I think one of the reasons the Spotify Wrapped feature does so well is because we so closely relate music to our personality. Music can tell people about who we are and what we're about. And some brands have done that, where actually saying that you shop with a certain, let's say Lush, says something about you. If it shows maybe your values are aligned. So these are the things where it's like, how do we do that? How do we get brands so that people align with them and almost have a sense of personal identity by being a customer of that place?
What would your advice be for B2B purchases here? Because I'm just thinking about the cybersecurity firms and the HR SaaS firms who are thinking no one's ever going to tattoo, right HR onto their shoulder. And then honestly, probably not. You think there's something that they can do in terms of advocacy that would make a difference in that kind of sector?
This is where I pull out my shirt and I've got a big HubSpot tattoo across my chest.
Yeah. I think HubSpot, if anyone's going to get it, it's going to be HubSpot or SEMrush. The race is on.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And I think it comes back to what we said right at the beginning of this conversation, which is that we have to remember that businesses are people. Right? Businesses are run by people.
Yeah.
Assuming that you're going to get someone to tattoo something on them, yeah, obviously it's an extreme example. I'm sure. I'd love to know if someone has a SEMrush tattoo.
Right,
someone must.
Email me immediately if you've got a SEMrush.
Yeah. Charlie will send you some free prizes or something, I'm sure. But I think if you're B2B, it's obviously you're going to struggle to get that brand loyalty in the sense of tattoos. But for me, B2B would be about putting the people at the front so that, people follow brands because they understand who the founder is. A big thing you see in our world, in the digital agency world, and Exposure Ninja is a perfect example because Tim's all over this, is having a personal brand, having a founder who people know about, and it's a founder-led brand. And, you're not selling products to customers. It is B2B, but then the people are still the element that people build trust in and loyalty because of.
Yeah. Absolutely agree. Phil, this has been amazing. I've got a last question, which is anyone listening who's thinking about this human first approach, where do they start? What's one small but impactful thing that they could do to move forward with making sure that their marketing is human first?
Other than buy my book when it comes out, right?
Which is, they've already done that now.
Okay, right. Well, that's happened. I think in its simplest form, bring a human face into your marketing content, whether that's a team member, a customer, a founder, an executive. Put out some marketing that celebrates one of those people. Allow your audience to see them, like actually see what they look like and how they sound and, what their opinions are and their values and these sorts of things. You see it on LinkedIn constantly, but the content that has faces, even if it's an awkward selfie, even if it feels like it doesn't really relate to what you're posting about, it outperforms content that doesn't. And I could talk to you for ages about why that is. All sorts of psychological theories around facial recognition and why babies stare at faces and all these sorts of things. But we trust faces more than we trust logos. Mm-hmm. So put some faces in your marketing would be my very simplistic advice.
Love it. And for anyone who wants to buy your book, where can they get it?
Yeah, so, naturally Amazon is going to be the main place, but it should be stocked in many other places as well. But head to my LinkedIn or head to Amazon and there'll be links all over the place.
Okay, amazing. So thank you so much for joining us today, Phil. It was awesome to hear all about the book. I love the concept. I think everyone's going to really be captivated when they actually read it. Based on the chapters I've read, I was totally engrossed. So definitely
Oh, that's
recommend
lovely
it.
for you to say.
So, Phil, for anyone who wants to buy the book, where can they get it?
Yeah, so the book will be available on Amazon. It'll be available in other places too, but Amazon's probably the main place to check.
Okay, amazing. And let's say that someone wants to find a fantastic social media agency to work with. Giraffe Social, I couldn't recommend them more. They're the place to go. What's your website? How do they find you?
Yeah, you can head to giraffesocialmedia.co.uk or follow us on Instagram at giraffesm or on LinkedIn where we're pretty active as well.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for joining me today, Phil.
Thank you, Charlie. It's been great.